It's Friday in Sadr City, the slum on Baghdad's edge that is home to over 2 million people. The old regime called this neighborhood Sadr City, but its Shiite residents have always known it by another name, Moqtada Al Sadr, Revolution City. If there is to be a Shiite uprising in the capital, it will be here. Nationalist cleric Moqtada Al Sadr's father and uncle led uprisings here that were brutally repressed by Saddam Hussein. Most of Moqtada's immediate family was assassinated, but the Sadr movement survived underground. Saddam banned the Sadr's prayers, but every Friday since his fall in 2003, thousands of people have filled this street to pray in the 110-degree heat.
المهم أننا لا نفقد صلاة الجمعة. إمام الجمعة يذهب يأتي بدله عشرات ويأتي أكثر وأكثر. المهم أن نحافظ على صلاة الجمعة.
No movement fought harder against Saddam's regime than the Sadrists, and no neighborhood in Baghdad faced more brutal repression than Sadr City. Today, the same movement and the same neighborhood are at the center of resistance to the American occupation. Abu Zainab, like many Sadr City residents, sees the current fight with the Americans as a continuation of the resistance to Saddam. He asked us not to show his face because he fears reprisals from the Iraqi army.
أي في زمن صدام حسين كان الاضطهاد والمعاناة وحالة الفقر والبؤس موجودة، أي بمعنى إذا طلع عندنا وزير واحد أو طلع عندنا عضو مجلس نواب واحد من الناحية السياسية، هذا لا يعني هنالك تغيير في الحالة السياسية للمدينة، أي بمعنى الناس الفقراء هم باقين الفقراء، بل بالعكس نزلوا إلى مستوى خط الفقر. هذه في بداية تأسيس المدينة مثل ما أسلفت قبل، سميت بمدينة الثورة، حقيقة هو ثورة على الفقر، ثورة على الطغيان وثورة على الطغاة في زمن، سواء كانت العبودية اللي قبل في زمن صدام حسين أو الآن اللي ترفض الاحتلال، ومعروفة عليه هذا تصور جاوبنا عليه. ترفض الاحتلال، أي واحد يرفض الاحتلال هالشكل.
Early into the occupation, the Americans allied themselves with the major middle-class Shiite parties, incorporating their militias into the Iraqi army and their leadership into the governing council. The Supreme Islamic Council, or ISKI, is the dominant Shiite party in Iraq's ruling coalition. Its leaders lived in exile in Iran while the leaders of poor Shiites in Sadr City were being liquidated by Saddam. Sadr and the Mahdi army opposed the occupation, but the leaders of the Supreme Council have cooperated with the Americans from the beginning and see benefits in their continued presence.
إلى الظروف العاطفية ونقول يلا خلي تطلع هاي القوات وبعدين إحنا بيناتنا نتعارك ونصفيها، هذا الأمر لا يصح. لن نلهث وراء العواطف، لن نلهث وراء الشعارات في أي محافظة من المحافظات. بذاك الوقت شنو اللي يصير؟ تقدر الحكومة كنا نقيم أن الحكومة قادرة على أن تقضي على كل مشكلة تصير في أي منطقة من المناطق.
The Shiite Supreme Council wants the American military to stay, but polls show that most Iraqis support the position of Moqtada Al Sadr's party, demanding an immediate American withdrawal. Janan Al-Obeidi is a member of parliament for the Supreme Council.
أما الجماهير فجماهير المجلس الأعلى جماهير متعقلة أكثر من جماهير التيار الصدري الذين هم أكثرهم من الشباب المتحمس الذي يعتقد أنه بالسلاح ممكن أن يحصل على ما يريد. طبعا هناك في التيار الصدري هناك عناصر مثقفة واعية ولكنها متبنية لفكر هذا التيار وهو فكر المقاوم بالسلاح.
Members of the Supreme Council are dismissive of the Mahdi Army's passion and tactics, and the United States military has tried unsuccessfully to destroy the Sadr militia several times since the invasion in 2003. The U.S. 1st Armored Division operates along Sadr City's southern edge. The Sadrists and their militia, the Mahdi Army, have built their base in poor and neglected Shiite neighborhoods like this that have been ignored by the governments that came to power after the fall of Saddam Hussein.
The Mahdi Army was kind of able to step into that vacuum, and they became the government that provided fuel, basic needs and services, all the essentials that people needed. People depended on them to get sugar, flour, water, electricity, and fuel, everything they needed to survive.
Over the last 5 years, the U.S. has declared the Sadr movement illegal, shut down its newspaper, put out an arrest warrant for Moqtada Al Sadr, and fought pitched battles against the Mehdi army. But in the end, the U.S. has been forced to accept the Sadrists as a legitimate political party, even while fighting its militia, the Mehdi army, or JAM in American military shorthand.
People know that it's not tolerated by coalition forces and Iraqi army to display a propaganda that shows guys with weapons, Mahdi army members, marching up and down the streets. And if they do have it, they keep it hidden away. You still will see propaganda like what you see on the wall right there. Things like that are all over the city. It's hard to take in and comprehend that JAM is also a political party, and it's one of the most popular in Iraq.
I'll take your picture, okay?
The U.S. is trying to build an intelligence picture of the Mehdi army's political and military presence. It is, perhaps, Captain Slack's most difficult mission.
We need a picture of your son. We need a picture.
واحنا ما رايحين قلت لك على اساس
صورة ما عندك في البيت؟
لا والله ما عندي منشار حتى من هولاك
She
عندي
said,
بالبيت
I
شعر
swear we didn't have a picture.
How do you not have a picture of your son? That's your
ما
son.
عنده صورة.
Let us have a picture of your son.
She
Just to
swear I
look.
don't have.
Your son, is he Jam?
والله ما اعرف
She didn't know.
ما اعرف
Your husband said he was.
ما اعرف
بس رزق قال كان قبل هو بجيش المدني.
يجوز يدري ابوه بس اني ما ادري ما شفت
What's his cell phone number?
ايش قد رقم تليفونه؟
انا لا اقرا ولا اكتب
She didn't know.
When civil war erupted in Baghdad in 2006, armed men poured out of Sadr City, targeting the people they claimed were responsible for attacks on Shiites and taking over entire neighborhoods. Tens of thousands were killed, and hundreds of mosques were burned. But not all the fighting was between Sunnis and Shiites. Tensions rose between the Shiite Supreme Council that dominates the government and the Iraqi army, and the armed followers of Moqtada Al Sadr, who controlled the streets. In late 2007, the Sadrist parliamentary bloc finally withdrew from Maliki's government because it refused to demand a timetable for American withdrawal. This past spring, the Iraqi and U.S. military launched offensives against Sadrist strongholds in Sadr City and Basra.
Mistakes have been committed.
Salah al-Obaidi is the spokesman for the Sadr movement. He admits that members of their militia took part in sectarian violence, but claims that the current attacks on Sadrist strongholds are politically motivated. Obaidi says that the Supreme Council's own militia, which also participated in sectarian violence, has not been targeted.
We do not like our people to be the only part which suffer from the last mistakes. Now all the media against Jaish al-Mahdi, against the Sadrists, to make them the only party, the only people who has made mistakes during the last period. And this is totally wrong.
بالنسبة للأخوة في التيار الصدري إلى أنهم مخترقون من قبل عناصر مجرمة اتخذوا إجراء من مضطرة الحكومة والدولة أن تأخذ إجراء عسكريا في هذا المجال. كنا قد نبهناهم إلى إمكانية التعاون إذا أبدوا استعدادا لتسليم هؤلاء الخارجين عن القانون سوف لن يكون هناك اقتحاما للبصرة أو مدينة الصدر ولكنهم لم يفعلوا.
The Sadrists did not cooperate, and Sadr City was not spared. Over 1,000 people died in this spring's fighting, and the U.S. and Iraqi military walled Sadr City off from the rest of Baghdad.
The wall and everything, all the operations that accompanied the wall were all in an effort to cordon off Sadr City and sort of isolate it. This was their home base. It's a contained area now, so any access back into the city is controlled 24 hours a day, from now until we don't need to anymore.
On the other side of the wall encircling Sadr City, residents compare the Iraqi army operations to the collective punishment used by Saddam Hussein aimed at breaking their neighborhood spirit.
أكيد هو المحصلة هو شنو لتقييد الحرية، لتقييد الحركة، لتقييد إنه تقييد الإنسان بصورة عامة، إنسان المدينة في سبيل إنه تحويله إلى سجن كبير معروف عليه.
هاي كلها ماتت. هاي المعمل هذا سادينه غالقينه. هذا الباب منه ها شوف ماكو فد شيء باو حتى منه. هاي من السده الساحة الحمزة 18 كيلومتر هاي الصبات ماكو أي منفذ.
يعني حتى هذا باب رزقك راح ينقطع من ورا ذنب. أمريكان هي سير الحكومة العراقية خلي يسوون هذا الشيء قال مدينة الصدر ولا يسوي خاصة بس التيار الصدري.
Abu Zainab says the struggle here has not changed between a political elite that ruled from Baghdad's rich neighborhoods and the rebellious poor who crowd into its slums. He says that the government may be run by Shiites instead of Sunnis now, but they are just as distant from the reality here, and they fear the poor of Sadr City.
والمناطق الباقية من الكرادة هذه طبعا يمثلون الشيعة الأغنياء الأثرياء اللي معروفين. احنا الطبقة المسحوقة اللي موجودة مثل ما انت اسلفت حضرة جنابك قاعدين في هذا المكان في الشرق.
After completing the wall, the Iraqi army began launching regular raids inside of Sadr City, which they say target criminal gangs. But the Sadrs believe that the Supreme Council and Iraq's ruling parties are not worried about criminals. They want to weaken the Sadrists before the next elections, which were scheduled for this October, but have now been postponed until next year.
There is a big popular pressure against the government and political parties refusing a long staying of American forces inside Iraq. Iraqi people have suffered too much and they do not have the patience to suffer more. Those parties who has ruled Iraqi situations during the last 4 years, they are afraid from the popularity of Sadrists. They are afraid that the coming elections will not have the same result in the last elections.
The Iraqi army is acting with a new, aggressive self-confidence, but it still depends on American support. The Maliki government's spring assault on Sadr City would have been impossible without American air power and armor.
وين يوقف هو لازم منين من القطعه مالته احنا نفتش.
عود واحد والله العظيم ما
فكانت هنا موجودة عصابات ميليشيات مسيطرة على المدينة على الناس الفقراء ففرض هذا القانون دخل الجيش فالناس اللي يضوجون من القانون ما يقبلون القانون يقولون مالكم مزيف. أما جيش المهدي تقول لي يرجع كقوة عسكرية ما أعتقد.
Colonel Kadam believes that Moqtada Al Sadr's Mehdi army is gone for good, but even the Americans admit that most of the Sadr's military leadership and equipment remain intact. In this raid, the Iraqi army found unregistered weapons and arrested people who could not adequately explain why they had them, but they took no high-value prisoners and found no rockets, explosives, or heavy weaponry. The Mehdi army has all but disappeared from the street, but the few services the Sadrists used to provide for the poorest of the poor have vanished with them. The Sadrists used to run this camp on the edge of Baghdad that houses tens of thousands of Shiite refugees from the civil war.
ماكو مساعدات. الأطفال مدارس ماكو تعليم ماكو. منتشرة خلينا نقول أمراض منتشرة. الخدمات صفر.
When the government launched its attacks on Sadr City and Basra, it sent the army in to evict these families a second time. The families refused to go, but the Sadrist organization vanished. We asked if there were fewer refugees here, now that sectarian violence has dropped.
لا زاد.
Families battered by Iraq's shattered economy.
العوائل تمتلك خط فقر حتى دون تحت الصفر.
Back in U.S. Army Captain Andrew Slack's outpost on the edge of Sadr City, soldiers are awakened at 4 a.m. by the sound of fighting near an Iraqi army compound.
Hey, are they shooting from over there?
It sounds like it's coming from over here.
Yeah.
And then you can see it. You can see it hitting the compound.
It was all over in under 30 minutes and difficult to identify the combatants.
I think the biggest frustration that we've had since we've occupied, maybe occupy is not the right terminology to use, but the big level targets, they've all vacated and left. We're really working hard, I guess. You know, we're to police up and figure out who is still out there and to what extent they're capable of doing overt attacks.
Captain Slack's men know that while the Mehdi army may have disappeared from the street, it has not been defeated, and they wait on the edge of Sadr City, ready for attacks to resume at any time. The military has been frustrated by its inability to track down Mehdi army members, but on the other side of the wall, we found Ali, a fighter whose sister was killed in this spring's attack on Sadr City. Ali showed us video of his homemade bombs. He says the Mehdi army cannot be defeated because it is made up of ordinary Iraqis who fund it out of their own pockets.
وبالنسبه لذول يعني السواق ما اعرف شنو اجمع انا اشتغل ايش قد يومي 20000 مثل ما نقول 20000 هاي شو اسوي بيه؟ اعزل 5 على صفحه للجيش لاين وذاك يجمع وذاك يجمع نسوي مثل حدود يعني كميه كبيره ندزهن يدزون لنا سلاح وسليفور.
In their most aggressive use of military power yet, the Iraqi government has shut down several Sadr's Friday prayer meetings across the country, arresting an imam and hundreds of worshippers. Here in Sadr City, the army has installed itself in the middle of their prayer space. The last person to cancel Sadr's prayer services was Saddam Hussein, who saw them as a dangerous platform for popular organizing.
والله القوات هاي قاعد بالطريق تستفزنا تاخذ المصلايات من عندنا. انا باوع جيت من الرشاد، اهلي مو هنا بالرشاد. المصلايه شنو ياخذون المصلايه ويتعدون على الناس وماكو داعي يعني هاي القوات وكل من قناص فوق ماكو داعي. ليش اكو صلاه بجامع براسي؟ اكو ليش؟ ما يطوقون. يعني منعوا الصلاه بالعماره، منعوها بالديوانيه، يردون يمنعونها هنا، يعني رقابنا ما يمنعون الصلاه. والله باوعني احنا نقبل بالشهاده. هلا هو جاي يعني يضربنا لو فج.
هل انتهى الاكسباير للحرية؟ هل انتهى اكسباير الشعارات الزائفة؟ في أي عصر رجعنا حتى يكون ضمان لعدم مشاركة التيار الصدري في الانتخابات؟ لا بد من تشتيت وإغلاق صلوات الجمعة حتى لا تبقي لهم من باقية.
While the Iraqi army advances to take control of the street, Iraq's ruling Shiite parties are maneuvering to co-opt the Sadr's political position in a striking retreat. In July, for the first time, Prime Minister Maliki adopted Moqtada Al Sadr's central demand, a timetable for a full U.S. withdrawal. The ceasefire has been widely read in the press as a military defeat for the Sadrists, but they claim they are just reorganizing, part of a military strategy that al-Obeidi laid out publicly for the first time.
The Americans started to think of reduction of their troops, started to think of pull out gradually from Iraq. Their decision has been changed. So our decision have to be also changed into another new style.
The Mehdi army is restructuring itself militarily, from a popular militia that was difficult to control but numbered in the tens of thousands, to a few thousand guerrilla fighters organized in more disciplined special groups.
This calming period is to rediscipline them, to give them opportunity to train maybe, and to have a break, a fighter break for the coming situation. And we hope that the negotiations between Iraqi government and American government reach to a decision of timetable. Maybe in that time we will not be in need of all these groups also.
Meanwhile, the Supreme Council is pushing back against the call for a swift American withdrawal.
التيار الصدري منذ البداية كان يدعو إلى خروج القوات، ونحن كنا نقول أن قواتنا غير جاهزة لخروج القوات الأمريكية. من المواقف الأمنية احتجنا فيها إلى دعم القوات الأمريكية وكذلك السياسية.
Here on the streets of Sadr City, Mehdi army members keep the angry crowds away from the Iraqi soldiers. There is calm here for now, but the fundamental rift remains unhealed. The middle-class Shiite parties who came to power through their cooperation with the U.S. still depend on America's military presence, and the party of the Shiite underclass continues to demand an American withdrawal.
If the Americans continue this strategy of forcing the situation against the Sadrists, they will face big surprising in the future, and they will still walking on the quicksand.
The Americans are carefully watching the Sadrist attempt to reinvent their armed wing.
I think definitely they're trying to reorganize. These guys are a little more organized into specific cells that do specific things, operate in specific areas with very, very precise objectives.
The Sadrists are waiting for the Iraqi government and the American military's next move. They warn that if the promised pullout does not happen, their fighters will return, better armed and trained. Al-Obeidi says the Mehdi Army's new special groups will not participate in a civil war, but will fight the Americans as long as they stay in Iraq.
We are not anti-Americans, we are not anti-British, but in the same time, we want the liberation of our country.